Thank you. All right.
So today, first thing we're going to do is just a presentation on the general fund. Subsequent to that, once we finish with the council discussion and questions, then we'll move on to the special revenue funds and the capital budget. On the 28th of July, we have scheduled a second round of budget workshops, which will in essence be the time to catch up if there are any lingering questions, details, things like that. Again, we'll deal with the general fund, the special revenue funds, and the capital budget. That day, what we have targeted as well is there's a new state law that requires each municipality and county to go through a 10% reduction exercise on the general fund. It'll be the first time for us, as it will be for every other municipality and county in the state. So we're going to plan to do that on the 28th. That should meet the timeline as required under state law. And that is simply an exercise. Doesn't have any direct bearing on the budget that's being proposed. That same day, pending council approval, we would have a special city council meeting to set the millage. We have to do that prior to the first few days of August. So we're hoping to target that day to do that after the workshop. On August 11th, as council is aware, we are having a water and sewer fund workshop. We're going to talk about the water and sewer fund today, but we're not going to get into the level of detail to deal with all the projects that were highlighted in the town hall and the meeting and the presentation that CHA made here, because we're taking that information, those questions, and the insight that we got from City Council, working through that to get you something on August 11th that'll be more robust and then get some more clear direction as to what you want to do moving forward. On September 3rd, again, this is pending council approval. We're hoping to have a special city council meeting for the first public hearing of the budget. This is a product of what happened of state law, basically. Last year, the same thing happened. Our first meeting in September ends up being too early to meet the statutory timeline for the public budget hearings. So because of that, we have to schedule a special meeting basically 1 or 2 days after our regular meeting, which is what that reflects. And then on September 15th, we would have the second public hearing of the budget. And we would also, with council's approval, adopt the utility rate resolutions that evening. So let's talk about the current budget and some of the highlights. So the FY26 budget, the one we're in right now, is the 9th straight budget with no tax rate increase. I want to thank the Finance Department for the Distinguished Budget Award we received from the Government Finance Officers Association. That reflects the great work that they've done to put the 26 budget together. In the current year, our general employees, were awarded a 4% COLA, cost of living adjustment, as well as a 2% merit. We also provided for contractual increases for the police and fire union contracts. We absorbed the increase in health insurance. I think that's a great perk that we were able to offer our employees in the current fiscal year. In terms of hurricane preparedness, which is a council priority, we acquired 2 fuel trailers this year, as well as 2 6-inch portable pumps to help us with our stormwater issues. The council adopted a social media policy for elected officials. They also adopted a short-term rental ordinance, which I think is a groundbreaking type of legislation. We acquired AEDs for the ball fields with council direction, created an innovation office. We launched the Celebrate What's Next initiative. We held 2 food truck rallies within the CRA. We also renovated the utility billing office, and as you probably walked by coming in here today, so it looks great. We put a new floor in the Lightfoot Senior Center, a new playground at River Hills. One of the most sort of momentous decisions that the council made this year was adopting the general obligation bond ordinance, and we'll see what happens on August 18th at the primary election. The police department and fire department also had successful accreditation visits this year. We have been archiving historic artifacts. Riverside Park, the project was approved by City Council, and we're moving towards construction in the first quarter of 2027. We acquired additional equipment, as we've done every year, for the Family Rec Center. This year, I think it was an allotment of treadmills and other things like that. CRA properties were tentatively approved by the CRA board and the council for sale. And the utility service centers, if you drive by it on Whiteway, it's close to being completed. We'll have a ribbon cutting, I think, sometime in August for that. And the EOC is well under construction and is meeting its timeline for funding. So that's the part that we control. Now, of course, we don't live in a vacuum. We're part of a greater economy. And so there are some challenges out there right now in the macroeconomic world. So the National Consumer Price Index for urban areas, which is what we use when we look at sort of the metrics that apply to our community. So May 2026, the 12-month period ending May 2026, the national CPIU was 4.2%. Just to have you understand what the difference was, a year prior was 2.3%. So you're seeing basically inflation that's happening right now. In our local community as well, we are seeing some cooling of the home market, and industrial real estate activity also has cooled off in 2026. And we're seeing an uptick in unemployment as well. In terms of housing, there continue to be affordability concerns with housing. We're not seeing necessarily that prices are dropping precipitously, and we're seeing small drops in prices. But what we are seeing is that the homes are staying on the market longer. So, for example, a year ago, a home in Temple Terrace would be on the market for an average of about 53 days. Today, it's about 64, 65 days that it's on the market. Homeowners insurance continues to be a concern, which is further dampening housing activity. So that's sort of the market for that perspective for residential, which is a big part of our local economy. When you look at commercial and industrial, if you'll recall a year, or probably over the last 2 years, I've talked about if we can only have more industrial property, we'd be better off because it's a low service demand entity, but it's a high generator of tax revenue. The marketplace has caught up with us. In essence, what's happening is that if you look at this chart here, you see in 2021, the vacancy rate for industrial property across the region, this is not necessarily just Temple Terrace, was 3.6%. Today, it's 7.3%. So now there's been a supply that's been provided to meet that demand. So the vacancy is going up, which is dampening some of the rents, which in essence also dampens some of the valuations later on. Commercial is restabilizing. Commercial and retail particularly is stable, but there's a limited inventory of retail out in the general Tampa Bay marketplace right now. Now, speaking specifically of FY27's budget and the revenue constraints that we're operating under, so we just painted the picture what's happening in the economy. In terms of our tax base growth, the final number we had an estimate that was about 1.3%. It's the final number that we got from the property appraiser now is a 1.71% growth in Temple Terrace's tax base year to year, this is the lowest growth number in a decade for the city. So to understand the order of magnitude here, if you look at the number from last year, so at this point last year, we were looking at a number that was going to generate an increase in revenue, ad valorem revenue, of $825,338. This year, this 1.71% growth will generate an ad valorem increase in revenue of $337,762. So it's far less, which makes it a little bit tighter, considerably tighter for us to operate, but we've made it work. The other revenues that we get towards the general fund are basically flat or declining, with the exception of particularly utility service and franchise fees and some building fees, which we'll talk about. This chart just graphically illustrates what I was just mentioning. You can see here the progression of growth in our tax base. As I know I've been saying, and the team's been echoing that, this is not sustainable. We all knew that eventually this wave of growth would taper off. So you're starting to see the taper now. The last couple of years you've seen it. With some of the changes proposed under the state constitutional amendment that's going to be on the ballot in November, this chart will look dramatically different in the future as well, should those amendments be approved. This chart illustrates some of the other general fund revenues. So again, you see here that most are flat or declining, with the exception of utilities, franchise fees, and things of that nature. Those are the ones that are seeing some slight increases. Everything else is pretty much status quo. So now specifically looking at the 27 milestones for our budget. So the thing I want to stress right out of the gate is that this will be the 10th straight year with no increase in millage. We are not proposing any tax rate increase for the 27 budget. Our total general fund budget is projected to be $41,377,705. The budget meets as many council priorities as we could within the limits of the financial constraints we're working under. It maintains competitive pay and benefits, and that was something that I really want to commend the team The department directors particularly, what I asked is, and you'll see that 79% of our general fund budget is personnel costs. Those are almost fixed costs. So the department directors don't have a lot of flexibility with that, but the remaining 21% they do, and they were really great about sharpening their pencils this year and trying to make the math work so that we could come out with no increase in millage. And allow us to make sure our employees get raises. We also continue to fund our public safety contractual obligations in this budget. We fully fund all the general fund positions. We are not proposing any additional FTEs or no new positions for the general fund. We have a continued emphasis on professional development. That's the one thing that I really want to thank the team as well, because they get it. This community for years didn't stress professional development and training, and it's one of the things for the last several years we've really wanted to change. And I know that when things get tight, it's sometimes the first thing that people want to cut, and I think that's a horrible idea. We want to make sure that our staff, particularly when they're under challenge, that they have the tools necessary to perform. So that's something that we maintained in this budget. And we're also going to be using more and more technology. I think that goes without saying, but particularly for this community, there's certain things we're going to highlight throughout this morning's presentation that achieve that goal. So property tax millage rates in the county. I have not heard that any other entity is proposing a tax rate increase, so this is a slide from this current year. It's probably still the same then. So if you see here, overall, this is the overall tax rate, so all the different taxing authorities that would show up on your trim notice. So overall tax rate at Tampa is still at 19.84, and Temple Terrace we're at 19.53. So we're right there in terms of our position behind Tampa. Some of the council priorities that we did incorporate in this preliminary budget. Council stressed that they wanted to make sure that we continue to professional development and continue to cultivate people in our organization. People are the most important asset we have. So we've continued our internship program. We also continued the leadership and management program, which has been extremely successful for us in allowing us to get people who might be starting out in their career or college students, things like that, bring them in to the organization, teach them what it means to be part of this Temple Terrace family. And then when an opening happens, we bring them in and they're already trained up and ready to go. The leadership and management program allows us to foster future leaders in the organization and helps us with succession planning. Budget continues funding for employee engagement and education. We also, council direction, added $1,000 each to the Riverwatch Task Force and the Bike Ped Advisory Committee for outreach. This budget also, and this was, I believe, a priority for Councilmember Fernandez, implements building fee and building fee penalties increases as well. So as council knows, you appropriated dollars for us to do a building fee study. We should be bringing those results to you for adoption sometime between now and the beginning of the next fiscal year. And what we're actually using some of those building fee increases as assumptions towards this budget document moving forward. We also increased outside legal counsel funding to $45,000. So in this current budget, it's at $20,000. I remember Councilmember Kravitz last year at the same workshop asked if that was enough. And my answer at the time, I believe, was, it's the first time that we've really increased that budget, so let's see how it goes. And then we'll come back this year with a number that might be more indicative of where we are. So that's what we are proposing right now. We are also adding $20,000 for a land development code consultant. So one of the council priorities was to get our land development code revisions actually through the council for hearing and for adoption. We've been working on some of these for several years now. The challenges I know the council realizes is that we're doing that all with our own staff, particularly with the planning staff. When you look at all the projects, you're getting all the applications, site plans, subdivisions, things like that. They take priority because there's certain statutory expectations of time for those applications. So working on the land development code revisions is harder to do when you're dealing with these different workloads. We're also currently short-staffed in planning, which is not helping. So council asked us to look at what we could do to expedite some of those revisions. So we programmed in $20,000 because we felt we could afford $20,000 in this budget. I will be very clear. I don't want to mislead the council into thinking that this is the panacea, this will resolve it all. This is a small number. In the world of consulting, this won't get you very far. It might get you maybe one or two specific land development code revisions faster than we could address it, but it's not going to address the full breadth of all the land development code changes that could be necessary. But that number would be much, much higher. And again, we had a tight budget. We were trying to make all the pieces work. We also expect to have permitting software in fiscal year 27 and go live with that. That's, I believe, Councilmember Fernandez, you brought that up as well and under council priorities. So we're hoping to get that in place, and we expect to get that in place during the 27's budget. We proposed $75,000. This is the same number we've done for the last couple of years for additional City Hall improvements to continue working on improving this building. Particularly as different pieces are changing. We're moving the dispatch down to the EOC and things like that, allow us to do more flexible, make the building a little bit more conducive to what we are as a City Hall today. We continue to fund $10,000 in arts funding in this budget. And we continue to collaborate to have code, the police department and public works collaborate on quality of life issues. And quality of life issues here specifically, I'm dealing with some of the priorities that were mentioned by a number of members of council about dealing, for example, with issues of homelessness and making sure that we have areas that are, vegetation is kept down, that we keep clear, that the CLU still works with folks to help them get to resources they need, et cetera. So that continues to be a priority and is included in this budget. As I mentioned shortly, a little while ago, 79% of our general fund budget is personnel costs. That includes wages, benefits, payroll-related insurances, and payroll taxes. So again, it's really hard to make a lot of changes without touching people in the budget when you have to make dramatic changes because of the magnitude of how much of it is just the personnel side. Let's talk now about public safety. I just want the community, and the council obviously knows this, I want to make sure the community fully appreciates this, that this city council and this city, we value public safety tremendously to the tune that we, in this FY27 budget, public safety, police and fire alone, personnel costs alone, represent 127% of the entire ad valorem revenue we'll be collecting. So that means that every single dollar we get in ad valorem revenue goes to public safety and then some. So 127% goes to public safety. Some of the particular changes of note, I want to make sure that the council is aware of this year. So we have an actuary that works with the police pension board as well as the fire pension board. And regularly they'll tell us what we have to contribute based on the marketplace of the pension. For the community to know, there are only two departments or two sets of individual employees that receive pensions in the city. And those are police officers and firefighters. Everyone else is on a defined contribution plan. So pension does require a significant contribution by the city. The police pension this year, based on the actuary's recommendation, has an increase of $328,719. Again, that's the increase. That's not just the same number. That's how much more we have to pay in the FY27 budget. We're also negotiating a new police union contract, and we have programmed for that increase $426,907. Now, of course, we realize that we're still negotiating. This is just a plug number we put in based upon what we think would be a fair increase. But again, that number could likely change. Fire pension contribution, $337,911 increase over the current fiscal year. Fire union, the third year of their contract, is going to be a $355,730 increase over the current year. And then we've got personnel in fire and police who aren't union, such as the command staff and the administrative support staff. And that increase will be $139,672. So total for public safety from the personnel side for two departments alone is $1.6 million increase over the current fiscal year for FY27. You can see that represented here on these graphs in terms of just sort of, you got personnel expense here and you have the paid pension expense also noted. Now, everyone else, the remaining employees that are funded, so the remaining 10 departments, for example, that are funded in any way by the general fund, the increase for those employees is $495,333. Largely driven by what I'm proposing here and the team is proposing is a 4% COLA and a 2% merit, which would be consistent with what we've done the last 3 fiscal years. You can see on this pie chart here, in terms of the increases, you see here that police and fire, again, represent the vast majority of the increase, and non-public safety is about 9%. can see this. This is comparable graph. This is, again, just a non-public safety personnel investment that we've made. And I want to just point to if you look at the purple column, the last one for 27, you can see how it's come down. And again, that's thanks to the effort that everybody put this year to kind of really tighten the numbers. Of course, it's not just wages. It's also benefits that add to these increases. Every year at this time, we are basing our budget on assumptions because we only get the final numbers typically in August for our insurance costs. So if you look at insurance, we are assuming a 12% increase. We're also assuming for other insurances a 10% increase. So that would be property, liability, auto, and workers' comp. So when we put together the budget, I'm sure this is a practice that is common across many municipalities. Everybody puts together the numbers, they're given certain parameters, and then we work with the finance team and we do a first round. And then in the first round, it is very common that we'll have a deficit because we've got more expense or less revenue, and we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we make everything to balance? So here are the steps that we took to balance this particular budget. The first one I want to take a little time to explain. So it says here, use of carryover savings. So historically, and this is a common practice across the country in many municipalities, historically what we've done here in this city is we'll budget a number. Let's say it's $100,000 for some line item. We'll budget $100,000. If the department director, when we meet with them in March, for example, as we're preparing the budget, and the department director says, I'm only going to spend $50,000 by the end of the fiscal year, typically what would happen is that $50,000 delta then would just go into unassigned fund balance at the end of the fiscal year, go into your savings, if you will. That has allowed us over time to build up our unassigned fund balance in those cases. The challenge we have with this upcoming budget, because it is tighter and our revenue is much less than it has been historically, is we were trying to very much not impact the millage rate. We wanted to be very, very tight with the millage rate. So what we've done instead this year, I think, I shouldn't say instead, because we've done it in the past. I think we've done it with much more regularity now this year, and this year's FY27 budget is looking at that same example where that was $100,000 budgeted and there's $50,000 expected to be spent. Rather than put that $50,000 into an assigned fund balance, what we're proposing to do is carry that $50,000 over to next year's budget, the 27 budget. So in essence, you don't have to budget for it again. You don't have to impact the millage rate again. You're gonna have it as part of the budget. What that means is that the budget that you will adopt in September of this year will be a certain number. Once we close out the fiscal year for fiscal 26 and we get all the final math done, we always come back to you and do a budget amendment later in the year, in the calendar year. And when we do that budget amendment, we will bring the savings over. We'll bring those carryover savings into the fiscal 27 budget. So that practice allowed us to save $345,743. We also looked at administrative overhead. So internally in the general fund, we have an administrative overhead charge because, for example, the finance department that works on everybody's budgets. I work on everybody's budgets, things like that. So there's administrative overhead that's always contemplated. Again, very common practice. For the CRA, you can do the same thing. CRAs in the state of Florida allow for operational administrative expenses. Historically, we've not charged the CRA for those expenses because up to just a few years ago, we didn't have enough money to do that because all the money was going towards paying the debt. Starting about 3 budgets ago, we started to have surpluses in the CRA. So now we have more flexibility there. So we looked at the CRA and we realized, for example, that Mr. Pauly, for example, for all intents and purposes, he's running the CRA on a day-to-day basis, but we weren't charging any of his salary to the CRA. Portions of our salaries, portions of public works that are picking up trash in the CRA or fixing the parks in the CRA, all those things, portions of them can be charged off with a rational nexus, which we believe we have, to the CRA. So what we've done is we've done that to a very conservative degree here. So we're charging $484,528 from the CRA to the general fund to accomplish this. We've also been very successful, again, thanks to the finance team's leadership, in getting our FEMA funds back from some of the storms. We have a lot more coming, but we felt comfortable with the amount of FEMA funds that had already been officially encumbered for us, that we could book at $170,429 as revenue in fiscal 27, which is what we've done here. Another thing is looking at interest. So as you know, the city it generates interest. We collect money from different revenue streams, put it in bank accounts, for example, and then that generates interest. Historically, what the finance department will do is then take that interest and they will allocate out the interest back to certain funds, to the CRA, to the CIT, et cetera. That builds up those reserves in those funds. You're not obligated to do that. That there's no law that specifically states you have to do it. It's just practice the way we've done it here. So what we did this year is we actually moved the interest earnings from the CIT and the interest earnings from the tax increment fund and move those into the general fund. Show that as revenue towards the general fund, so it's $165,000 there. The building fund, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, we were looking at, hopefully council will adopt a building fee increase. And we typically provide a subsidy, as has been noted by the council in the past, of about at least $300,000 or more from the general fund to the building fund. And by increasing the fees, we will hopefully reduce that subsidy. So we provided a conservative reduction in subsidy here, about $150,000, assuming council adopts these building fees. So that's new. Short-term rentals, as I mentioned when we talked about the highlights of the budget, we're going to start the short-term rental program, actually started July 1. And so there's a fee associated with a short-term rental based on the numbers of projected rentals we believe they're in the community. We anticipate a conservative $20,000 in the budget for that. And the final substantive item that we use to balance the budget is streetlight maintenance. So our streetlights, we pay a bill to maintain the streetlights. And that maintenance expense has historically been charged entirely to the general fund. However, we looked into this and we felt comfortable that we could charge this to the street fund, because the street fund is where we have all our paving, our sidewalk work, our stormwater infrastructure, et cetera, that services our streets. So we felt that this was a rational nexus to charge this off to the street fund. So there's $515,000 that have moved from general fund as an expense to the street fund. So you may ask, if we're doing these changes, particularly with the change in carryover, what does that mean for our unassigned fund balance? Because historically, if we weren't doing as much carryover, our unassigned fund balance would then be growing at a faster pace. So as this chart illustrates, it illustrates a few things. First of all, let me draw your attention to the red horizontal line, which is at 20%. So, you know we're going into the bond market potentially this year, either through a revenue bond or through the general obligation bond. And a minimum, you have to get a bond rating first when you do that. And the minimum for a AAA bond rating, which is the highest bond rating, I'm not saying we're going to get AAA. It's very likely we would not be a AAA community. Typically, that'd be a much larger community or a lot more economically diverse community. The county, for example, is AAA rated. That is the vast minority in terms of a rating for entities in this country. But to get a AAA rating, you have to have a minimum 20% unassigned fund balance ratio. And you can see from this chart that we far exceed the 20%. In fact, about 2 budgets ago, we talked here at this workshop and we said, we're exceeding the 20%. Let's change the target to 25. We felt that comfortable doing that. Council accepted that recommendation. So you can see here that we're hovering right now. We anticipate at the end of the 2026 budget that our unassigned fund balance will be about 34.04%. That's projected till we close out the books. We won't have definitive, but that's what it's looking like right now. So we are still well above both the 20 and the 25% council goal. Now, although not specific to the fiscal 27 budget, I think it would be remiss of us not to talk about some of the implications for the future budgets from the constitutional amendment that is on the ballot for November, or that will be on the ballot for November. So today, 69% of our Temple Terrace homes have a taxable value of $200,000 or less. But if you look at the market value of Temple Terrace homes, the average market value of a single-family home in Temple Terrace is over $420,000. So that chasm between the market value and the taxable value, what that tells you is that we have a lot of homestead-protected properties in our community. And so the impact from the constitutional amendment, should it be adopted, should it be passed, would be significant for us. In fiscal 28, The proposal that will be voted upon is to increase the homestead exemption to $150,000. That would mean that in fiscal 28's budget, the city would see a reduction of $2.6 million based on where we are today in ad valorem revenue. In fiscal 29, that homestead exemption, should it be approved by the voters, would go up to $250,000. And then that reduction will increase that change would increase the reduction to $4 million, which would be 21% of our current ad valorem. Those are very, very significant numbers. And so because of that, we have started already to look at, first of all, what kind of impacts would we face, and what could we do to mitigate for those impacts. So again, looking towards the future, this is not for 27's budget, but planning for 28 and planning for 29 should this be adopted. I think that without a doubt that we would be looking at programmatic service reductions. That could be attrition, not filling open positions when they turn over. It would directly or indirectly also mean reduced unit size or limiting hours for certain services. Could be anything from senior center, library, family rec center. The reducing units could be, for example, in the police department. You had created a traffic unit several years ago. We have openings in the police department all the time. If we chose not to fill all the openings, maybe this hits one of those units, things like that. Could also be looking at reducing or discontinuing non-core services. Now, I'm not a fan of the non-core service label, because I think everything that makes a community wonderful, as a wonderful place to live, is a core service, regardless of whether it's public safety or not. But that will be a conversation I'm sure people will start having in the community. And then the last term here, I really struggled whether to include it here or not. I don't want to panic our team, but we just want to be realistic. If we had to lose $4 million, it is very, very likely that we could be looking at layoffs as well. That would be the very last thing that we'd want to do as a staff. We would look at ways to avoid doing that, but it is a scenario that could play out. So I just wanted to put that there so that it's very evident that could be a scenario. Now, to mitigate for that, the council could, if it wanted to, and we could explore that if the council wishes us to, look at alternative fees. Fire assessment fees. I know historically this community has looked at that under a different context, and it has not been supported. However, if you're looking again at a $4 million loss, this is something you may want to look at, particularly if you think about, remember the slide where I talked about public safety? It's such a large part of the budget that if you wanted to explore a fire assessment fee to at least reduce some of that consumption in the budget so you could have some flexibility with everything else, perhaps that's something to consider. The stormwater utility fee could be something to explore as well. Our stormwater infrastructure is not getting any better. We're going to continue to have that investment in perpetuity. And I know we're still in kind of a drought here, but it's only a matter of time before we start getting those deluges, and that's when we start to see some of the bigger problems. Florida also allows for park special assessments, things like that. I mean, there's different tools out there that the council could explore if it wishes to. We could also look at fee increases. So family rec center fees, our fees, it's a great value. It's a wonderful value. But we don't compete. We're not in the same universe. Our direct competitor is really the Y in terms of the kind of programmatic pool and studios and gyms that we offer. And we are not even in the same universe as the Y in terms of what we charge. So maybe that's something we look at as well. Fire inspections, we do not charge for fire inspections. I'm not sure if it's most, but many communities do charge for fire inspections. Our EMS fees, we've also been advised that our EMS fees could probably be raised if council wishes them to keep up with the marketplace. Those would be the fees for transport, things like that for 911 calls. And of course, the last one goes without saying. It's really, again, an increased focus on technology. That's not necessarily a product of this ballot initiative, but I think it will be more of a greater reliance on that as we move forward. And that's what we have for the fiscal 27 budget.
Council questions? Councilmember Schisler.
Thank you. That's a lot to try to absorb. I do have a couple of specific questions. See how I read my writing here. Did we not going back to the one thing, the FEMA fees? Didn't we already recognize those FEMA fees? Can we use,
Good morning. We have not recognized, well, let me go back. I think we only recognize a small amount for Milton. We've had like 3 storms in the past few years. We did recognize a bulk of fees for prior storms, but no, we have not recognized the revenue. And we have about at least 4 million coming, mostly to replenish the fund balance. But that 4 million was alone covered our debris pickup costs.
okay, but the 170,000 hasn't already been recognized when we declared the receivable?
No, it has not.
Okay, all right, that's, because that could bite us. What is the recovery rate? And that might not be the right terminology. You know, it costs us $4 million, say, pick a number, to run leisure services. And I noticed that the one slide had fees for recreation and so forth. What's our recovery rate on that as it stands now? 25%, 30%? I mean, I'm not,
Can you, when you say recovery rate, can you explain that a little bit more as to what you're getting at?
like I said, we charge for joining the rec center
Yep.
and utilizing the,
You mean the recovery, the amount to full cost? Are we covering our full cost?
how much of that, what's at Hart, we call it fare box recovery. So
Yeah.
how much of that are we recovering?
I'm not sure if we have that, Corey.
That's just a
you know,
curious
If we can
question.
get back to the council. Okay, we'll get back to you on that.
That's fine, that's fine. And then on the one slide that showed the unfunded balance, 27 went to 0. Is that because you just stopped at 26, or?
Right, because we're not able to tell what's going to happen at the end of fiscal year 27, so, because right now
Well,
we're
we got a bu-
projecting,
we got a
the
budget.
26 number is still a projection as well,
Okay,
because we're not
all
at the end of the
So
fiscal.
we're not, that shouldn't probably be.
Yeah, that's not really a 0, it's
Okay,
more
all
of
right,
a
okay,
NA,
just
not
checking,
not
just
available right
checking.
now for information. yeah.
Just checking.
Good point, good observation.
And then, no, I think that's all the questions I have for right now. But thank you for the additional numbers or qualifying the numbers on the fiscal 28 impact and the fiscal 29 impact, based depending upon the 200,000 and the increase in the homestead exemption. So thank you for those numbers. It'll cost you $1,580,000 to plug the holes. It's going to be a hard one, but thank you. That's all I have for right now.
Other questions?
Yes.
Councilmember Fernandez.
Can you go back to the steps to balance the budget slide? Okay, so I'm just going to start at the beginning. The use of carryover savings. When you used your example of maybe 100,000 budgeted to a department, they're only spending 50,000, so that remainder 50,000 is rolled over into their budget. Do they need to come to you and maybe justify is not the right term, but explain? I don't want to be in a situation where we're budgeting because last year the department's budget was 300,000, so this year we're just going to say 320,000 is your budget. Can you describe the process of how that department requests the specific funding that they're requesting?
Sure, good question. So what we do with everybody, so when we ask all the departments to submit their budgets, then Mr. Ingram and his team and I will look at the budgets even before we meet with the department. And we'll look for trends. And so we look for a trend, and typically the trend will be a multi-year trend. Let's say it's 2 or 3 fiscal years at least that we'll look at prior. And we'll say, okay, how much have they historically spent here? And if we're seeing that the trend is far below what we've been budgeting, then we will not continue to budget at that level. So to your example is, again, if that 100,000 they only spent 50 and it's been 50 now for 3 fiscal years, then we're not going to say we're not going to budget 50 anymore. Like all you're going to get is going to be a lower number, whatever the number should be based on actuality. So that we do that with all the departments. We do that as we go through all their line items. In fact, it's one of the ways that we can control costs, because it's important for us not to keep just because they got it 1 year, keep it going. That's not the way that it's not the way I was taught to do budgeting. It's not the way that I think our team operates as well. So that's why I said when we asked the departments to really sharpen their pencils, really look at that, look at the trends, look at where you've been in the past. Because if you haven't spent it, or alternatively, the other way could be like, let's say you spend to the full amount every year or slightly over, then, maybe you need to increase that request going forward.
Thank you. I have a question basically about each of these items. So, for the CRA and the TIF funds, I'll combine those two. I know, I have no issue with allocating some of the expense because it certainly, the tasks are spent in that area. But I did want to make sure that the public understands that the CRA and the TIF funds do have specific limitations as to what they can be spent for. So can you just briefly, just so that people understand, it's not the same as general fund revenue ad valorem taxes?
Correct. So what happens with the TIF is that, so in our instance, we receive, the city's general fund actually pays about $900,000 per year towards the CRA. It's our obligation to pay into the TIF. The county pays into the TIF, and then the third one's the Tampa Bay Port Authority, I believe, pays into the TIF. So those three entities pay into the TIF. That's based on statute and whatever practice was in place when this was adopted here locally. The TIF dollars can only be used for activities within the borders of the CRA area. So within those geographic borders, you can't use it to fund things that are happening outside. You can't use it to fund a park, for example, on 113th Street. You can't use it to fund the special event that's happening, at Greco or whatever it is. You can't do that. Now, you could fund things inside the CRA, certain activities. You want to have those activities delineated typically. You can fund operational expenses. For example, many CRAs have funded if they have, some CRAs will have like a special, they'll call them different names, like ambassador crews, district cleanup, things like that. Special activities where they're cleaning up. You see them in large cities, for example, where the people dressed in like a yellow uniform. Those people sometimes will be funded from the CRA. So that's in essence what we've done here. Now, your expenses with the CRA, your CRA reserve is you're going to talk about that in the second presentation. It's actually pretty healthy, despite the fact we're taking these dollars from there. And you don't have many expenses in your CRA. So I don't see anything where we're running afoul of what we're doing. It's very limited what we can spend it on. So we're spending our CRA dollars on our debt, which is about $908,000, I think it is, in FY27. On debt, we're spending about $3,000 on an audit because we have to do a separate audit for the CRA. And then we've got this expense here that we're allocating from the CRA to, again, cover what we believe are very defensible expenses in terms of personnel costs for investment made in the CRA.
And then my last question on this particular slide, and that is the interest earnings from the CIT, which are the funds for the community. So first, I just want to define TIF, which is the tax incremental funding, which is the extra ad valorem tax that the city is able to collect based specifically on CRA value as part of creating the CRA years and years and years ago. But the CIT, which is the community investment tax, that's the special sales tax percent that is only allowed to be used for investment in the community. How are we able to use the earnings or the interest from the CIT funds that we have been allocated but we haven't spent yet on general fund that's not specific to like some sort of community investment like infrastructure or equipment?
So it's a good question. So let me just, can I just clarify one small thing? So the TIF, the tax increment fund, it's not an extra tax. It's the tax increment fund. Basically what's happening there is that the properties that are in that geographic area, they're paying the same tax as everybody else. What's happening is that the value from the Tampa Bay Port Authority, from the county, and from the city, the value that's in that area, the new value beyond what was approved back when the CRA was founded, whatever year that might have been, let's say it's 2000, the incremental value there is what's being put into the CRA. So the property owner there is not paying any additional tax. I just want to make sure that's clear in case anybody starts
Yes,
thinking
thank
I'm
you
paying
for the
extra tax.
clarification.
And then you're correct on the community investment tax. It's a half-cent sales tax. We're not addressing the community investment tax dollars that come into the city. So what a taxpayer, somebody who buys something wherever in Hillsborough County, would go to a store and they buy something, they pay the half-cent sales tax. Those dollars, we're not using those dollars for anything but the purposes they're explicitly meant for. What we're talking about here is interest that's being generated from the dollars that are basically sitting there in our accounts until we use to expense those. Now, we looked at this expense, and maybe Mr. Ingram, if you want to just talk to it a little bit, if there's anything I'm missing here to help clarify this.
No, yeah, I don't think you've missed anything. We looked into it, and it is a practice done where if you need to infuse more money into your general fund, there are other governments that have done that whereas the typical practice might be to use all of your funds and take the pooled cash, the total amount of cash you have sitting in the bank, and divvy up your interest accordingly. You don't have to do that 100% across the board. As far as I've seen, we can do, before we finalize the budget, we can do a deeper dive maybe into the Florida state statutes, but so far I haven't seen anything that disallows us from, instead of recording interest to one fund, you can't put it toward a weightier fund, a fund, particularly general fund that has payroll expenses. CIT, TIF, we're doing the administrative expenses, but CIT does not have any expenditure like that other than what we're buying or projects funded
Okay,
through that.
so the interest earned on allocated CIT funds that remain unexpended at this time, so they're in the bank earning interest. There's no state requirement that that interest only be spent on CIT eligible expenditures. The interest that it's earned while it's sitting there, we're allowed to use in other expenditures.
Right. Again, we will, before we finalize this budget, we will double check that. I have not seen that preclusion, but we will double check and make sure.
I just want to make sure.
No, that's a good
I
question.
think one thing
Good
that you
question.
mentioned, Jim, and correct me if I'm wrong, these are pooled, the money comes in from the CIT, but it's not put in a CIT bank account.
Right.
No,
It's pooled.
no, it's pulled cash, yeah.
But
It's not
again, I
specific.
just want to make sure that there's nothing that
Yep,
would
we'll check.
preclude us from doing that. And then I do want to talk about, I have two other items. One is the document retention system that we are looking to improve. And so throughout this increase in technology discussion and the budget, how does that encompass the improvements in document retention to make it easier for staff if there's a FOIA request or any kind of need to search the documents? So how does this help staff time with saving the documents, archiving them, and also retrieval?
Well, actually, although that's part of the second presentation, we can talk about it now since you mentioned it, if it's okay with the rest of the council.
I mean, we can wait till the next one, but I just wanted
It
to
might
make sure that
might be good to just address it now, since you brought it up. Could I get Ms. Torres to come up and address the council member's question, and maybe give the council an update too, as where we are with that project?
Sure. So over the last year, we have, since the inception of the project of the document management system overhaul, there's been quite a few improvements made to the system that we already have in place. There's been improvements in the ways that the documents are actually filed, the way that they are able to be retrieved from the system, and that was kind of the first layer of the project that we went forward with, the discovery section. From there, we wanted to determine what opportunities there were as far as how we could make that system more, as you said, more efficient as far as retrieving those records for the public, making sure that that timeline was reduced, and making sure that workflows between departments were done in a way that was the most efficient between those departments. So what we did is we compared various different programs that we could use, whether that be changing the system entirely or using additions that were part of the system that we currently have. And what we landed on was a multi-phased approach. The first phase of that approach is going to be changing the overall way that the records are requested in the first place, the experience that our resident or customer, whoever is requesting that item, has. So there will be a portal that they'll be using in order to have that request go through. That portal will then go through the journey of basically alerting each department that has anything to do with that particular request, and a workflow will be started in order to get those records. And it will be able to track the timeline that it takes to retrieve them, where it goes, how long the overall request takes. So we're able to gather some data along with making that whole interaction a lot more pleasant. It will also allow us to provide, an invoice if there's going to be a charge associated with it, collect that. It will essentially add automation to the whole front-end process of requesting a record in the first place. What we'll be doing with that is we've chosen a product, just FOIA, which is an extension basically of the current product, which is the Laserfish product. This allows us to do something that's in addition to what we already have. We're not spending, a huge amount in order to do that, and we're getting the highest amount of, payoff for the public within a short period of time. At this point, we are in the process of reviewing legal documents on this so that we can get a requisition through, and it will take us about 2 months in order to implement this system. So we're hoping that prior to actually any of the other systems going on, this would turn on first. So towards the beginning of September is what we're looking at. So at that point, customers would be able to have like an outside portal to go through the request would be tracked. From that point, after we put in that item, we would be doing additional cleanup on the back end in order to make sure that once we take that data that we received from the first phase, we're able to use that to its basically to its the best ability that we have in order to use it to make further changes. The third phase will be implementing another addition that is part of the Laserfish package, which is called a records management module. That is another piece that we can add on that does not cost us a ton to make the package a little bit more robust. It's going to allow us to further add more automation, metadata, be able to ensure that anything that's coming out of the current system is labeled in a way that it can be retrieved quickly. And there's also some opportunities in there for automated redaction. It has some additional features to it that we would be gaining from that last piece, adding that on. We anticipate that the whole project should be completed around the beginning of 2027, calendar year 2027 is what we're looking at.
So just to follow up then, as part of the technology or increased use of technology that you have indicated will be considered in this budget, will that management system help reduce personnel hours in not just FOIA requests, but overall managing the required archival and retrieval?
It should, if it works well, and in the long term, that's what it should do. It doesn't mean that we wouldn't need people still. It just means that rather than spend 3/4 of their time trying to address public records requests, now they could actually spend the bulk of their time doing probably what's more in their job description when they were hired. So that's hopefully one of the goals that we'll get from this particular project.
Okay, all right, thank you. I just have one more question right now, and that is, I want to make sure the public understands more about the required pension contribution for the police and fire pension funds, and that is, the actuary tells the city how much is required to be contributed based on the calculation of who is retiring, what age, because it's a defined benefit plan, which means that the people who participate in it come out with a specific benefit that they'll be paid every month. So it is a complicated calculation, and it's based on the balance of the current fund, what the earnings are anticipated to be, and then the city's contribution comes out of that calculation. So that where a lot of people in the public are probably much more used to a defined contribution plan where you contribute a certain percentage of your salary and your paid benefit upon retirement is based on what that contribution is earned over the lifetime. This is basically the reverse. Our contribution changes every year based on what the calculated benefit needs to be to the retired person when they retire. So it's a different, it's not anything that the city can control. That is 100% established by that calculation. It's not anything that we can change. So I just wanted to make sure that people understand the difference, and that's all I have for now.
Other questions? Councilmember Kravitz.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for the budget. I understand that this is sort of an early draft. Is that accurate, more or less?
Sure. This is the preliminary budget that we present to council. We get your questions, and then we come back. In this case, on July 28th, we'll come back. Answers, if not before then.
Okay, then file this away under, maybe I'm missing something. The proposed capital plan has a page for a big green tractor.
We're going to, so if I might,
Yeah.
this presentation right now is just in the general fund. We have a subsequent presentation as soon as the council's completed with
This
its.
relates to the general fund.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, so it is, the tractor is assigned to the general fund capital projects, but then in the documents provided, the general fund capital projects is zeroed out. So it seems like there's $75,000 missing.
So the tractor you're talking about, the $75,000 tractor, is actually being paid for, would be, assuming council approves it, paid for from savings from the current year. So we have a project in the current fiscal year that was budgeted through unassigned fund balance. So we already took the dollars from our savings account, in essence, used it to pay for a project. The project came in at far less than we thought it would, and so we're using that savings. So those dollars have already been budgeted. We're using that savings to pay for that tractor.
Oh, okay, so that doesn't show up then in the accounting for the 2027 budget under capital expenditures.
You wanna
It's
explain
in
it?
2026 then? Is that how it works, or?
It will be a part of a budget amendment in '27. Right now in our notes, we have like a 292-page document, and in the notes, it has that in our budget, and it has the notation that we're using the unassigned fund balance carryover savings so that we will, again, have a budget amendment.
No problem. Okay, thanks. Great. And just a couple of general questions, one relating to the streets. We're moving 400,000 from street lighting into the street fund. Should we expect then that there will be a reduction in the amount of repair or maintenance done to the streets otherwise if the...
I believe we're using some of that reserve from the street fund. Can you talk to that, Jim, as well?
I'm sorry,
This is the light, so we're moving $515,000 from the street light maintenance to the street fund. So the question is that going to impact the amount of paving, for example, in street maintenance we would do otherwise?
No, it's just merely moving it as a general fund expenditure to spending it out of the street improvement fund, which historically we've only done capital projects out of the street improvement fund, but we're not restricted to capital projects. And as Mr. Bahia said, it is a very rational nexus. I did check the Florida state statutes. You can use these kind of like street maintenance, street lights out of the street improvement fund.
Okay, sure, yeah. Well, if we're going to do that going forward, might it be sensible to rename it the street fund?
It is called the Street Improvement Fund, is the name of the fund.
Right, but now it's not only being used for improvement, it's also being used for ongoing expenses, so maybe just call it street fund. Thoughts?
Well, I would have to look into that, and I guess if that's something the council wants to do, we could change the name of it.
Yeah, I mean, I understand what the impulse is in this budget, and I just noticed a pattern of operating expenses moving into funds that are generally for renewal or new improvement. So this is one thing that tracks with a couple of other things that we'll probably come to later. But when ongoing expenses begin migrating into capital funds, that's generally a warning sign. And it's not necessarily terrible, but it was important, I think, that everyone name things transparently. So if the street improvement fund is not only for street improvements, then we could rename it so that everyone understands what it is. Just a thought. So.
Okay.
Okay, so, and then let me check my notes real quick here, I think I had one more. The subsidy to the building fee, I was wondering if, building fund, excuse me, I was wondering if someone might be willing to explain that a little bit. $300,000 a year seems like a lot, and I'm a little surprised by it. Also irritated that I didn't find it sooner, so.
Sure. So we have to, I'll give you a little bit, I'll go back a few years because this takes a little explanation first. So probably 3 or 4 years ago, there was a change in state law that mandated that building departments, which were historically, their budgets were part of the general fund, that mandated that building departments now be separated out in an independent fund where you could account for the revenue coming in from building permit fees, for example, and the expenditures from the inspectors and things like that, permit tax and whatnot. So in making that change, in our instance, what happened is that we would still need to subsidize the building fund, because now it's an independent fund and it has to balance. And the building fund would not be able to balance based upon the revenue that it was taking in and the expenditures that were being incurred. So the last couple of fiscal years, when we've done this in the budget under this new separate accounting for a different fund, we've had to subsidize, in essence, subsidize the building fund to the tune of $300,000 to $400,000, somewhere in that range. Because of that, what came up as a concern last year at this council workshop was we need to look at the revenue side of the picture. And when we looked at our fees, we realized that our fees had not been changed in probably 20 years. Perhaps more, which is not uncommon that happens in communities. I think I think it'll change now with some of the other changes happening globally. But a lot of times communities just kind of, they pass their fees, they don't go revisit their fees. There's not really an inclination necessarily on the part of the elected officials to increase the fees, and so the kind of things just stay a stasis. I imagine that's what happened here. I can't say for sure because I wasn't here 20 years ago. But the council, based upon the direction we had and looking at it, we felt that it merited, we need to do a building fee study to bring our fees up to date. So that study is being closed out now, will be presented to you, like I said, probably over the next month to 2 months. And looking at some preliminary drafts of that study, we feel comfortable that even at a conservative increase in your building fees, that we should be able to reduce the subsidy by at least $150,000 in the FY27 budget. So that's what's projected here as a savings, $150,000 savings. Over time, over the next, let's say, 2-3 fiscal years, in theory, what you'd want to do is get to a point where the building fund would be self-sustaining. You may not want to do that immediately, right away, because there will probably be some sticker shock in terms of some of the building permit fees. But that's a conversation we'll have once we present that to you, and then you can make a decision as to what you feel comfortable with as a body. But right now, we felt conservatively that at least $150,000 savings could be accrued here in the general fund based on what we've seen so far.
That's great, because I think moving toward more aggressive fees is definitely something that we need to do. I think there have been a lot of cross subsidies, and I'd like to see fewer of those, generally speaking. Now, when it comes to the short-term rental revenue, 20,000, is that going into the building fund?
No,
Okay. And why is that?
it's not part of the building fund. So the building fund activities are really limited to your construction permits, trade permits, things like that, and then the costs associated with administering that.
But the cost of inspections also comes out of the building fund, doesn't it? The cost of the inspector, let me put it that way.
But in this case, we're talking about the fees for the inspections here would be the fire fees that are related to the public's, the safety of the unit, which is part of the short-term rental. It's not within the building fund.
Are there no building inspections that are paid for by fees?
There are building inspections paid for by fees, correct. There would be, if you are doing a renovation, for example, to your property, you pull a building permit, then there would be a subsequent potential inspection, depending on what you were doing, that would be paid for by a fee.
And it would be interesting for me to discover whether the fees that are paid for such services could be treated differently, for example, for a commercial property or for a single-family home, because then we might explore increasing those fees on short-term rentals, which are commercial properties, or on multifamily units, which also are commercial properties. So if that is something that is legally possible, that might be another way of increasing revenue going to the building fund.
Potentially, I just want to, I'm sorry, I'm not clarifying it. And the short-term rental program you have is completely separate from the building fund. It's not because it's not administered.
I'm not talking about the permits.
Okay,
sorry, just
okay,
to clarify.
yeah.
I'm talking about what you just mentioned, namely if someone's doing a renovation.
Yes.
Right? So
You're trying to
they're
create a
renovating
strata where there'd be a commercial permit fee structure, schedule of fees, and a.
Yes.
So I think some of that's already addressed based upon some of the fee types, but it's a conversation that can, when we have the presentation, based upon the fee study, I'm sure you can ask that same question and get an answer directly from the consultant.
Okay. And final question, I know I bring this up all the time. Private sponsorships are used to a limited degree in Temple Terrace, for example, on 56th Street, the Banner program. Are there any current ongoing explorations of whether sponsorships similar to that could be expanded to other parts of the city or for other programs that the city operates? For example, public library, rec center, whatever we may have there.
We could look at that, and in fact, if the state constitutional amendment is adopted, I think it's something that, if council feels likewise, we should look to explore. I don't believe that it will generate some revenue. I'm not going to discount it. I don't know if it'll generate the type of revenue that will save a service, for example. In the worst case scenario, $4 million loss 2 fiscal years from now, for example, will that save an entire service? I think if we were in an area, if we had a large corporate resident in our community, like a Microsoft or something like that.
Amazon.
We do have Amazon. That is correct. You're correct. Potentially something we could explore. Absolutely.
I think we should, my personal opinion, we should look at this year. I have a personal opinion about what's likely to happen with the referendum on the property taxes, and I'm not going to share it here, but we should look at this year maybe as an opportunity, no matter what happens, whether it passes or fails. There are efficiencies that we can look for that we haven't looked for because we haven't felt the need, but now the need is there. The need was always there, but now it's more evident. So I think as we discuss the budget, looking at all the different ways that we might raise revenue and increase more efficiency in our fee collections, in our sponsorships, all of those things could really help. Also just in general to make sure that we're not raising property taxes even if the amendment fails going into the future. So that's all I'll say on that. Thanks, that's all I have. Thank you.
Couple questions. Going back to the idea of using the unassigned fund balance to carry forward and therefore reducing the new budget requests for various departments. Good idea, good strategy, helped us to stay within our constraints this year. My question is, have you modeled that out? Because I noticed that the unassigned fund balance percentage on that slide for FY27 was blank. And my question is, have we modeled that out to see, are we going to be able to meet our 25% goal and do this? This is a great strategy 1 year, but how sustainable is this and what impact will it have in our goal of 25% fund balance moving forward over another fiscal year or two?
So I think I understand, just to reiterate, that the reason it's zero is that it's projecting what you're going to save for a budget that hasn't even started yet. So that's why it's zero. We'll clarify that slide after, because I know if
Yeah, I know it's not really zero.
Right. We still feel that the number, I feel, and unless someone tells me differently, Mr. Ingram wants to address. Come on up, Jim, help me out.
One thing to keep in mind is that one of the reasons our fund balance, unassigned fund balance, actually dropped to 35% as of fiscal year, into fiscal year 25. And tomorrow night, you'll see that on a slide when the auditor presents our audit. But keep in mind that we have at least, as I mentioned before, $4 million coming back. That came out of our reserves for Hurricane Milton. That was just the how much we spent on debris pickup. So we do expect to get that back. And that will bump up the unassigned fund balance. Now, another thing to keep in mind as we go out is that there's still a considerable amount of that we haven't spent. The parks, or the Riverside Park, there's a big chunk of that in there. The ERP system, we are just now, over the next couple of years, we'll be spending that down more aggressively. So there's a lot of little things to look at. Over the next 2 to 3 years, I think we'll be fine, but we certainly will need to look at that and continually look at that year to year, especially as changes may or may not come. It will be, I will say it will get more challenging.
Okay. Well, you're giving me way too much information. I just wanted to have some reassurance if we're going to be able to meet our 25% goal or not. Have we looked at that? Is it a concern? Are we good? Or, you know, I mean.
So to pick up on thank you, Mr. Ingram. So I think to pick up what Jim is saying, we all feel comfortable that barring any change in state law at this point, where we are today, based on the laws that we have in place today, that we are good for, like as Jim said, at least 2 or 3 more years. We don't. Now, of course, if we had a hurricane season, and we had 3 or 4 back-to-back storms, that will have an impact. Eventually, we'll get reimbursed, but it'll take a while. So that could impact, but that'll impact everybody who's in the same boat in terms of that storm. So we feel reasonably confident that we're going to be good at hitting those targets. Again, state law changes, then all of this has to be changed. I mean, I think all the expectations will be different because you're going to be looking at a far different revenue picture.
That's a whole new reality there. So, okay. I now have another question concerns legal and the use of outside professional services. So, I'm looking at the FY25 actuals that we spent were $21,000. This year's budget was $23,000. We've exceeded that. Well, we are on track to exceed that. The FY26 estimates by October 1st are almost $60,000. So I mean, we're overspending our budget like crazy, and we're increasing in accommodation to that for FY27. We've proposed to increase that budget to 45. We're not reducing expenses, we're increasing the budget to match reality. And so I'm just wondering, what's driving that? Is that the bond council? Is that coming out of there, or the real estate attorneys that were hired to look at these potential land deals? That coming, what's coming out of there that's driving this?
So,
We're 3 times over budget.
correct. So there have been a number of factors that are part of this equation. So you're correct. So if council will recall when we had the blazing paddles, that those expenses, actually, no, I stand corrected. I believe those expenses came out of the CRA. So I stand corrected on that. But maybe the city attorney can speak to the other expenses right now that have come out of there. There have been ones related to different issues that have come up before council.
Right. Well, last year was the first year we kind of really tried to project the budget for outside counsel. So we kind of just picked 20,000, I believe it was the number. We did have a few things come up that we had not anticipated that were coming out of that, but the biggest thing probably was zoning, our zoning type stuff. We had zoning issues come up. As you know, we have the state legislature constantly pulling out more and more statutes that we're going to be regulating the land use. And my expertise in the land use, I can get us to variances and all that, but all the annexations, a lot of, stuff considering rezoning the higher end with all these statutory changes, we went ahead and got some specialization there, and that can just begin to add up. We did have a couple of other issues come up that would have fallen, that would have just fallen toward me, would have been outside the CRA that we're kind of paying for at this time too. So it's just more of we're trying to get a feel as to what the appropriate budget is for outside counsel as we try and balance what this legal department's going to be between in-house with using Nicole, trying to use technology as the city manager brought up, and then are trying to use outside counsel in order to provide quick, efficient legal advice to the city.
Did the bond council come out of this? Is this reflective of the bond council expenses?
It is, isn't it? Bond council is coming out of this, I believe.
Yeah, yes, I believe so.
And one other thing I believe was we brought in we brought in a part-time paralegal, and she's working with the clerk's department and our department. And bringing her in, we brought her in from Robert Half, and we had to pay out some, I forget what it is, what that's called, but we had to pay out her contract as we hired her here. So that also went in out of my budget.
Okay, well, that kind of goes to part of my question is I do understand that the bond council is something that we haven't faced, but I mean, that's an anomaly. The real estate deals, if that's coming out of here, I don't know if that's coming out of CRA or coming out of legal, but that's something that's not routine day-to-day business. But I do wonder, I mean, we have 2 full-time attorneys and a paralegal now, which is more than we've ever had before, and our use of outside attorneys is skyrocketed to 3 times what it used to be at the same time that we've bolstered our staff. And that's what I'm trying to get at is, if these are attributable to anomalies like the bond issue and the real estate transactions and, unusual things that come up, I fully understand that because I know city attorneys are generalists. So, and when you get a specialized area, you want to make sure that this is done by somebody whose specialty is that area of the law. But it does beg the question. I mean, we've increased the size of our legal department, and at the same time, we've tripled the amount of money that we're spending on outside counsel. I just want to make sure this is a flash in the pan and not, I mean, this is kind of hard to explain to everybody. It's like, wait a minute. You got 2 attorneys and a paralegal, and now you've tripled I mean, how do you explain that? And as long as the explanation is, well, we had some anomalies with the bond and the real estate, that's a good explanation, but this becoming business as usual is not a very good explanation. So anyway, that's that. Yes, Councilmember Kraft. Well, actually, Vice Mayor, you had a question.
Yeah, thank you. Could you, someone pull up the millage comparison slide? Thank you. Okay, so question, Hillsborough County and Tampa, they have a millage for just library services that we don't have. Is that included in that number?
Yes.
That .5 or 5.5?
Yes.
Okay, what about water service fees, stormwater fees? That's not in their millage.
So this would account for everything that shows up on their trim notice. So when they get their trim notice, their total impact on the resident, on the property owner, this is what should be included in these numbers here.
Okay, and I think in years past, I think the mayor had asked for this sheet to include costs of like street lighting fees and stormwater and other fees as comparisons to our city. Do you remember that, Mayor? We used to have it somewhere. It was either on our website or
It wouldn't be
something.
on the trim notice, though.
No, it's not on the trim notice, but we used to advertise that because there's fees that are charged in other areas that is not just, it's the cost to live in the county or the cost to live in the city. I know we used to have that somewhere. I keep looking for the city manager over here, and he's way down here. I'll figure it out by the end of the day.
I know that the mayor in the past has asked for comparisons for.
And we've had it somewhere, and
things
it's,
like that, so that.
yeah, just, you know, it's not just millage. There's fees that we have that they may not charge, and fees that they charge we may not have to live in our city. I know we had it somewhere, just for residents to see, so that was it. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Kravitz?
Thanks. Just a general comment on the legal department. To their credit, they did generate about $560,000 of fines and forfeitures. That was significantly over what was in the budget for that year. So I think that is a positive trend because in the past there have been a lot of reductions in these fines and forfeitures. And I'm not convinced that those are warranted if they're provided for in the law and we are entitled to collect. So in fact, if you take the fines and forfeiture revenue and you compare it with the cost of the department as a whole, which I believe is about $500,000 now, that's including all the staff, they do come out ahead. And I'd like to see that continue, even though in the 2027 budget, the estimated fines and forfeiture revenue goes down to $330,000. And I'd like to see an overperformance there next year as well as we have this year, or similarly too. And as far as the relationship between outside counsel and the staff that we now have in the legal department, to the point that the mayor raised, 90% of that is permanent. The staff is not going away. The only variable there is the outside counsel cost, and I think we've gotten very good value out of that. But that's 10% of what we're spending. 10% goes to outside counsel, 90% goes to our own legal department, and pensions and so on that we owed to people who were our lawyers in the past. So I think that is a permanent fixture if we go down this route with the size of the legal department that we have. And you know, I certainly think that the legal department has the capability to be a revenue driver and to also warrant its own size. And this year they did demonstrate that. And I think that needs to definitely continue going on into the future. That's all.
Well, I disagree, and I'm not gonna make a big fuss about this budget, but if we had the same thing next year with the outside counsel, I will be raising a big fuss, because the purpose of codes and fees and forfeitures is not to bolster the city's budget, it's to, I mean, how many years have we said this with code compliance? The goal is compliance, not revenue. And that would represent a fundamental shift in that principle, and I won't support that. I will ask next year, if this trend continues, why we've expanded the legal department and at the same time doubled, not quite tripled, our outside legal counsel. And I don't know what, maybe you can correct me, but if we've used outside counsel and somehow recovered some, but I don't see that the outside counsel has anything to do with the fees and forfeitures that have been recovered, unless I'm missing something. Maybe there's a case I'm not aware of. But anyway, okay, so, yes.
A quick
Yes.
follow-up comment and question regarding, since labor and related is almost 80% of the entire budget. Are we still utilizing specific identification of employees? I mean, years ago, the budgets were developed very haphazardly, and then you guys eventually got to where you had 5 employees in this department. You knew what each one was doing. So we're still doing specific identification. Good, because you get away from that, it becomes too hard to manage. And then the last comment that I wanted to make, that many of the items on the page of where the $1.8 million is coming from is going to be going after dollars that are stuck within specific funds that you can't utilize without moving it. And the only way you can move it is to allocate the expenses to it that that may not be normally recognized, so that you can actually put those dollars into the general fund, or not necessarily putting dollars in the general fund, but you're reducing the general fund expenses so that you can tap into those dollars. But the only caveat to that is that could be self-limiting over time. You know, eventually those excess dollars will be gone, and you'll. But that's down the road, and I'm sure that you're modeling that to make sure that it doesn't become an issue. That's my only comments.
Councilmember Fernandez.
I just have a couple of things. One, I also want to concur with the mayor that I do want to make sure that when we're considering outside legal counsel, that it is specifically for things that are more unusual or anomalies versus consistent city activity, just to make sure that we're not just having a good in-house staff, but also increasing our outside expenditures. I mean, I agree with that. I don't want to see it necessarily as a revenue source. The expenses, when we're setting fines or collections, obviously we should be establishing those to try to recover the costs in going through that process, but at the same time, I don't necessarily want to see it as a revenue source per se. But I am concerned, I just want to make sure that we're doing this consistently with what in-house can handle versus what we really have to have an external law or lawyer for. I do want us to continue considering the payment of ongoing or recurring expenses out of fund balance, because that can be a situation where we have established a requirement of the ongoing expense, but the fund balance will not continue to grow. So I know I don't have any issue whatsoever paying for capital improvements or equipment out of fund balance. I just do have a little bit of a concern as we move forward with paying any kind of recurring expense out of fund balance. And then with 79% of our general fund being payroll costs, can you talk a little bit about the best practices expectation of what percentage should be your employee costs? And can you just talk a little bit about, since the majority of it is safety personnel, police and fire, how we have established what our pay structure and how we've established this pay structure to be competitive with surrounding jurisdictions, just for people who aren't part of those talks.
Sure. So, although I don't have this for a fact right in front of me, I would gather just based on my experience and talking with other managers around the country that our 79% is pretty common. They're in the ballpark. That's 3/4 of your budget typically is going to be your personnel. And some communities it might be a little bit more, some communities it might be a little bit less. So I don't think we're outside the norm at all when it comes to that. I think in terms of the other question is, it's been very important to the council, it's been very important to our team to make sure that we provide competitive wages. You all remember, I'm sure, several years ago, that we had a legacy of not really being competitive, and so what was happening is we'd have consistent turnover, or we wouldn't even get people in the door to have turnover. So when I first got here, there were jobs that had been advertised. I remember it blew my mind. It had been advertised for 4 years, and it hadn't been filled yet. And so the team that we all got together and figured out how can we do this, and we brought some recommendations to council, and you supported, which is doing a compensation study, which we did early on. Actually, I inherited that. That's not even something that was my idea that came to me, and it was great because it got us to a certain landing in the marketplace. We've made other adjustments as well since then. Thank you to the council for providing the COLAs to the general employees, as well as supporting the contracts. Since I've been here, we've already negotiated a police and a fire contract, and you've been supportive of those initiatives as well. We're in a very unique situation, I think, here, because we're a small city, and we're right next to a behemoth that is the city of Tampa. And unlike Plant City, and I'm just using Plant City as an example, they're out in the eastern part of the county. And so it's not the end of the world. It's a little bit more challenging for their employee to make that calculation. Am I going to leave here to go work for the city of Tampa and have this 45-minute to an hour-and-a-half commute every day? But an employee for the city of Temple Terrace, that's an easy answer because it's right next door. I mean, you walk 100 yards and you're in the city of Tampa. So that was a challenge for us. So we had to cobble together a basket of benefits, both pay, health insurance improvements, other things like parental leave. Like, we were leaders in coming up with parental leave. I don't know if the other entities around us all have parental leave, but I know that we were on the cutting edge of doing that. Things like that we could put together to make us more attractive. I can tell you that on a pay perspective, we do not pay at the same level as Tampa. We don't pay at the same level as the county in some positions, but for Tampa, it's more glaring. In some positions, we're more competitive than others. But what we try to do is provide other benefits and other things. Like, it's a smaller city, so it's the quality of life here for an employee, I think, is better than it would be in the city of Tampa. I think in some respects, there's more of an avenue to progress. In some respects, there's less of an avenue to progress, because here it's a smaller organization, so you can become a big fish in a small pond pretty quickly. But in Tampa, you have more rungs to climb, and so you have a little bit more flexibility there. So we take that into account all the time. We're in a pretty good spot right now. Will it change? Yes, it could change. There could be a contract that's negotiated at the county or Tampa, and then all of a sudden we're on, now we're trying to play catch up again. But we also have to recognize our limitations, because we are a small city that, I can't, and I'm never going to tell you that we should pay exactly what the city of Tampa pays across the board. I can't tell you that, because we couldn't afford that. So we try to do what we can with the revenue that we've got. We try to be judicious with that revenue, and I think our employees appreciate everything that the council's done for them. And I'm hoping that you'll be supportive of the increases in terms of compensation and benefits that we've got programmed in this budget to maintain that competitive stand.
Thank you, that's it.
Okay, are we ready to move to capital? Councilmember Kravitz.
About the liens, you have people who are breaking the rules. As a result of that, they get a lien or a fine attached. The problem actually happens when you are reducing the lien, because some person might get 50% off. Some person might get 75% off. Some guy might not get a rebate at all. And so, in reality, the way to treat everyone equally is to collect all of the liens. When you start giving people lien reductions in order for compliance, then you have a process that's not transparent, and you have a lot of subjectivity. There's no way of knowing whether the person who gets 75% off is more deserving than the person who gets 25% off, or whether any of them deserve any reduction at all, because they both broke the rules in the same way. And so I just want to point out very briefly, it's not about driving revenue, it's about treating people the same way. And that's, so now I'm done.
Are we ready to go to capital? Okay.
You want to go straight into capital?
Want to go straight into capital, or do we need a break?
5 minutes.
You need 5 minutes? Okay. Mr. Bia, I think we'll move into capital.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council. Before I start, I did get an answer to one of the questions that was asked by Councilmember Schizler during the prior presentation about the recovery rate. So just looking at, in terms of leisure services, all we looked at was Parks and Recreation. And for Parks and Recreation, based on the fees that they charge, the fees cover about 25% of the total cost of Parks and Rec. Okay, so it doesn't seem like we're going to be able to fix that technical problem in time. So everyone on the council has been handed out a hard copy. As I was mentioning earlier, what Mr. Hill will be able to do after is, once he does the post-production, he'll be able to put the slide deck in. I imagine, I can't swear that this is how he'll do it, but he'll probably put, I would imagine, in sort of in the order that we're going to be talking about it here today. So I apologize for that. So if you would, could direct you to the first page. So today we're going to be talking, this particular presentation again is on preliminary capital and special revenue enterprise funds. Starting with the first slide is FY26, some of the capital highlights. River Hills Park, the playground, renovated utility building, the restrooms at the public library, replaced the treadmills, for example, at the Family Rec Center. We got a valve exerciser for the utilities department, and that was just a small list of many things that happened in the FY26 capital budget. If you draw your attention to the next page, the FY27 capital budget themes. So this is one thing that you've probably already noticed once you looked at the draft documents, is that this is probably the most limited capital program we've had in quite some time. And there is a reason, a very strategic reason for that, is what the team and I have found over the years is that, I think rightfully so, that the departments all try to do the most they can. And I think there's an idea that we're going to be able to do these 10 things. And then you realize once you start the year and you get through, there might be supply issues, there might be other competing projects that come through, other initiatives, and you don't get to the 10 things, you get to 7 of the 10 things. And you got these 3 things that kind of linger for a while. And eventually your capital program just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And we wanted to get away from that. We wanted to sort of press pause, if you will, in this year's budget and say we need to complete the projects that are still in the works that were approved under prior budgets. We also know that we're going to have our hands full, assuming council approves the water treatment plant improvements. That will take up an extraordinary amount of time on the part of our public works team, which is the one responsible for a lot of our capital program. So for those 2 strategic reasons, this program is scaled back. So this presentation actually is not very long because there's not a lot to it. The capital program also continues our investment in our employee safety and the public safety, continues hurricane preparedness efforts that this council has stressed, and continues funding for parks and recreation. So going on to the first page of the actual projects, as I alluded to in the general fund presentation from earlier, we are programming $75,000 again for additional work in City Hall. This is one of the council priorities. Next page, we are looking at making some upgrades to the council chamber equipment. Ironically enough, this probably, we may have to add to this item. But these upgrades that were programmed here, audio upgrades, new speakers, microphones, signal processor. So right now, as the council, you're aware, for example, small things like if your microphone's muted when you talk, Brian does a little flashlight. Well, there's systems out there that's as part of their package. Brian can actually unmute you, automatically. We don't have to be doing this awkward thing where you're like, oh, everybody's, he can do that. There's also the system would allow us to register, for example, if you raise your hand, you want to speak, actually you could press something either on your screen or whatever the apparatus will be there, and it'll put you in a queue so that the mayor knows, okay, who's in the order of who wants to speak. It'll also register votes. It's a feature. Again, these things are meant for bodies of different sizes, so it'll allow for that, as well as providing some audio upgrades and improvements to the meeting as well. This program, this system is budgeted at $59,500, and this is from unassigned fund balance carryover. So again, this is from a project that was already budgeted in fiscal 26 budget from unassigned fund balance. It was a capital item that we had savings from. So we're using those savings. We're not budgeting, in essence, not hitting the budget twice, although theoretically we're going to make an amendment. We're taking the money from this year's budget to pay for this item. Next page is the fire department. So you'll see here a lot of, wherever you see CIT, that means Community Investment Tax. That's the half-cent sales tax that we have, we receive, like all cities in the county receives here in Hillsborough. So the fire department, the largest expense proposed for the CIT this year is $525,000 for a new ambulance. And this replaces an ambulance, excuse me, just as I pull this up here, from 2010, if I'm not mistaken. Give me just 1 second here. Somebody said yes. Good. I'm glad somebody's saying yes. 2010 Freightliner ambulance. Hang on just 1 second. Correct. And then the thermal imaging cameras, we are looking to replace 2 of the cameras we have. These are the cameras that the firefighters use when they go into a structure fire, for example. Allows them to see if there's a body somewhere or someone in the room. That's $20,000. $60,000, this is an estimate for projected improvements to Fire Station 1. So with the opening of the EOC projected for the end of this year, what's going to happen is we are going to move the command staff from the Fire Station 1. We're going to move them over into the EOC building. That'll allow us to move fire risk reduction staff that's in City Hall. They'll move into Fire Station 1, so they'll be sort of at home within the fire department, because right now they're split out. And then we'll use the training room. You're all familiar with the training room at the fire station. That training room will be converted into the physical fitness facility for the fire station. Right now, the physical fitness center is in the apparatus bay. It's just wide open. They've got the weights right next to the engines and the rescues, and so that will move over. To make those changes, we're going to have to do some improvements, some drywall here and there, things like that. So we're estimating $60,000 to do that work. The fire department is also very proficient on a regular basis of securing EMS grants, emergency medical service grants. Typically, we don't budget for a match, but because they do it so regularly, we felt that it makes sense to have the match already budgeted. And this is from CIT, so this is the $25,000 there. We're looking to invest $160,000 for the EOC's furniture and fixtures. And this would come, again, from unassigned fund balance. So this is savings from an unassigned fund balance capital project from this year. Again, so we're just moving the savings over to pay for that. And then we're looking to invest $35,038 using opioid dollars. These are dollars from the national settlement the city was part of in the opioid pharmaceutical litigation. And that $35,000 would be basically the match to allow us to purchase a life pack. This is a EKG, a cardio monitoring tool that's used on our rescues. Next slide is the police department. We are looking to replace several vehicles in the police department. This is the ongoing program every year. We've brought you certain, just keeping the fleet fresh, so we bring you certain requests every year. This year, we're replacing a 2013 vehicle with 123,000 miles, a 2015 with 119,000 miles, and a 2015 with 128,000 miles, with 3 Ford F-150 pickup trucks. Now, I want to make note that the department's policy is really to move towards expeditions, the SUVs, and not necessarily the pickup trucks. We felt last year that we'd acquired the pickup trucks we needed. However, the chief this year, in looking at the operations of the community liaison unit, the CLU unit, felt that the pickup truck made more sense for those operations, because when they go to events, they're bringing tents, they're bringing boxes of material, they're bringing different things, and so it's easier to have the pickups in the fleet to allow them to do that than necessarily having the Explorers. So that's the reason for these 3 pickup trucks here. And that's an investment of $196,548, again from CIT. Also looking to replace the Special Enforcement Unit is basically our undercover operations. And there's a vehicle that they've used for quite some time. It's a 2013 with nearly, last we checked, 155,000 miles on it. Is giving us some mechanical problems. We'd like to replace that. And that would be for $32,980, again from CIT. Looking to add a tactical night vision scope to the SWAT team for $15,300 from CIT. And then acquiring a 4th drone, which would now provide a drone for all the shifts, for $24,400 from CIT. Next slide will take us to Parks and Recreation. As if you've used a fitness center, you know the first one here on this list is an important one. So we're looking to replace the air conditioning units 3 and 4, which is the fitness center and the front lobby, for $300,000, again, from CIT. They're all going to be from CIT unless I tell you otherwise, so I don't seem so repetitive. Also looking to remarcite the fun pool as well as the plunge pool for $80,000 and $30,000 respectively. Looking to resurface clay courts 4 through 6 for $40,000. Seeking to replace the LED sign at the Family Rec Center. So that sign, the technology in that sign, it's a stark contrast with the other LED signs we have. So we're looking to bring that up to more modern technology. That's $23,000. The fall zone at the Family Rec Center playground, looking to replace that to make it a safer experience, $75,000. Resanding the pool deck pavers at the Family Rec Center for $8,000. And then the Public Works Department, which does the maintenance of our parks and playgrounds, is looking to invest $9,000 to put in playground borders, as well as $75,000 for the tractor that was mentioned earlier by Councilmember Kravitz, so it's listed here. The tractor is not CIT, the tractor is unassigned fund balance carryover. Again, project's already been paid for this year, savings from that project moved over to pay for the tractor. Moving on to the Street Improvement Fund. So the Street Improvement Fund, just a reminder for the folks watching that it's funded from a variety of fuel taxes, basically, state fuel taxes, county fuel taxes, and it goes to maintain our streets. So looking at the next slide, we actually have the programmatic requests, and we are looking to purchase another flooding bypass pump for $150,000. Our philosophy is, at least my philosophy is, I don't think we can ever have enough pumps. So this is one that's the ones we've acquired have been extremely helpful. If we have a storm or even just a sort of a typical summer storm sometimes, if there's been a lot of rain already in the past, this is critical for us. So this addresses a council priority. Also looking to replace a long bed truck. It's basically replacing a 2007 truck that we've got today, as well as acquiring a dump trailer for $15,000. Next slide addresses paving. So I know the council has asked for a list of the streets to be paved. So what we've done is we've taken the PCI, which is the pavement condition index, and we've looked at that. Public Works staff has looked at that, and then looked at sort of the past history of the prior pavement condition indexes and seen the degradation, and then come up with a 5-year plan to address the streets, the paving of our streets. What is on this slide right here is the paving for the fiscal year 27. This is projected paving. Now, I want to just disclaimer, this happens in every single community. This is projected paving. Sometimes these streets will change, and they'll change because once you're in the field, you may discover something else that now whereas before you may have been doing a shim and overlay, but now there's a condition of the road that you discovered that you may have to do more of a full depth reconstruction. So now it changes your paving program because that's a more costly initiative. So things can change, but this is our best guess right now. In essence, it's a guess. It's our best projection of what the streets will be in fiscal 27. So I'll read through the streets. So Belmont Avenue from the start of pavement. So when we say start of pavement, typically these would be streets that either abut up against a county or a state road or at the border with the city, for example. Start of pavement would be when the city portion starts. To Gillette Avenue, Grandview Drive from Rainbow Drive to Beverly Drive, and then Grandview Drive from Ridgeway Road to Rainbow Drive. Shirley Drive from Rainbow Drive to Grove Hill Road. Shirley Drive from Ridgeway Road to Rainbow Drive. Chilcoot Street from the start of pavement to North 52nd Street. Pinehurst Avenue from Ferncliff Avenue to St. Augustine Avenue, and then Pinehurst Avenue from St. Augustine Avenue to Brentwood Drive. So that's what's projected right now. Now, I know you're just seeing this for the first time, so obviously the reason we do a preliminary today and we come back later is gives you some time to kind of digest through this, and then if you have any questions, you could follow up. Next slide is the 410 fund, which is our water and sewer utility fund. First item here is a GPS utility locating unit for $32,000. I have an asterisk here that this is council priority in the sense that it's part of the bigger picture of us trying to identify our underground infrastructure. Now, this will not by acquiring this one tool, it does not mean that we'll know where everything is overnight. That's not at all the case. Don't think that's the case. This is just a tool that helps us to better measure where our pipes are, where our valves are, and things like that. So it's part of the overall effort. Now, it should be said, because I've said this individually to at least one or two of you, but I want to make sure the entire body knows. We've talked in the past about being able to look at all our underground infrastructure and measure and map that infrastructure. That is a significant effort for any community. It is an effort that usually takes more than 1 year, multiple years. A lot of times you bring somebody in from the outside because you just don't have, your staff is doing other things. In light of the water treatment plant upgrades and the PFAS mitigation, we do not have the capability, in my mind, to do the mapping of all our underground infrastructure at the same time. That's asking a lot. So I just, ultimately, as you know, Council, we have to prioritize things. So right now, our priority, we feel, is from what we understood from Council, is the water treatment plant and the PFAS issue. So that's where our focus is going to be. We are going to do where we can. We're going to try doing pieces of this mapping. And you'll see this is here. We're going to talk about a GIS position as well. That's going to help us with that. But it's not going to be part of a very comprehensive effort at this point until we get through these other water treatment issues first. Next item is a camera truck retrofit. So we have a camera. It's part of it. It comes with a truck, and it allows us to, it's a mobile camera. It's on wheels. It allows us to video our underground stormwater pipes, for example, and our sanitary sewer pipes. It's a great tool to have. The truck is, it's getting up there in age and usefulness, and we looked at potentially acquiring a new truck, but a new truck is at least $600,000, whereas you can retrofit our existing truck and make it very comparable to a new truck for $300,000. So staff felt that was a much better investment, so that's what's proposed here. Looking to install a chlorine monitoring system. As you know, in this current budget, we have programmed a conversion from what we typically do for our chlorine disinfectant. Right now it's gas, and we're going to move to liquid. We feel that liquid is a safer solution for us, a bit more manageable solution. But in making that transition, once we make that transition, we'll need a new monitoring system because it's a different form of disinfectant. So that's $150,000. The next item is SCADA. SCADA is the remote operating system for both our water treatment plant as well as our lift stations. Council, as you know, recently in one of our meetings, you approved the improvements to the water treatment plant SCADA, which is critical. I can't stress enough, this is probably one of the most important things you're going to do. Because SCADA is the life, the brain, if you will, of our system, of any system, actually, across the country, probably around the world, in terms of water and sewer infrastructure. So we feel it's important. This would allow us to upgrade the SCADA systems for our 49 lift stations for $375,000. And then, of course, we have the water treatment plan, master plan upgrades. Right now, that number is in excess of $8 million, but we're going to talk about that at the August workshop. So we didn't put it in here, but it's programmed into a tentative rate, so which we'll talk about later in the presentation. Next slide is the 440 Water Improvement Fund, and this is last year, if you recall, we talked about the iHydrant program. It was the fourth year of making improvements. The iHydrant program is telemetry that's mounted on our fire hydrants. And so what that allows us to see is you can receive, our staff gets a text immediately if there's a loss of pressure at a hydrant. Because a loss of pressure at a hydrant is usually the first sign that there's a water main break somewhere. Earlier this year, of course, that became a very great tool to have because it allowed us to address those issues quickly. So this is the final year to get the entire system in play for $40,000. Next slide is the 450 Sewer Improvement Fund. This is impact fee funded fund, so this is not on the rate. This comes from impact fees. Looking to acquire a vacuum truck for $375,000. So in the current budget, you know, we acquired a pump truck, and we have a vacuum truck. So today we have the old vacuum truck and we have the pump truck. We'd like to have this other vacuum truck as well, because the vacuum truck we currently use is getting older. This is another thing like the pumps. You can never really have enough of these because they use the vacuum trucks for everything. You have inlets, you need to vacuum out the leaves and things like that. You have a water main break, you have a sewer break, you need to get the liquid out of there so the staff can work in the hole and put the pipe together. You need to get things off the street gutters and things like that. This is what helps us do all that. It's a workhorse for us, so it's an important acquisition. And it's impact fee fund in the sense that we are we're adding capacity to our system. You know, we're trying to do more and more within our system, so we need this vehicle to help us keep up with that. Next slide is an FTE request. So as I mentioned earlier, we do not have any FTE requests in the general fund, but we do have one here in the water and sewer fund for a GIS specialist. So today, in our organization, we have a GIS coordinator, and he's great. He does a ton for us, maps all our different layers of our GIS, also manages our interns in the engineering division, and just is a great asset to have. However, I will tell you from direct experience that our GIS capabilities are still lagging in terms of, for example, where I came from, my last community, where we did a lot of it in-house, but it was much more sophisticated there. So we all agree that GIS is one of the areas that we need to improve upon, particularly if we want to get to the point of mapping out all our infrastructure. We need to have the extra capability internally to have somebody help us with that. So this GIS specialist would allow us to do that. The number you have here, $81,295, is total wages, taxes, and all benefit calculated internally. So it's the full package is what we anticipate for this position. Next slide is actually talking about the rate now for the water and sewer fund. As council will recall, during the meeting, that Stantec presentation they made to you earlier this year, as well as the town hall, they talked about a 10% rate projected for fiscal 27 to as the first step to allow us to generate enough capital, cash flow to go out into the marketplace, for example, and do a revenue bond if you needed it to help keep up with the water treatment plant improvements that we're projecting. So this budget today, the preliminary budget you have before you, contemplates that 10%. And of course, we're waiting for the direction at the workshop. We'll have hopefully final direction from the council as to kind of where you want us to go with that. But right now, it's a 10% rate increase as recommended by Stantec. Next slide takes us to the fleet fund, the 510 fund. We are recommending a forklift for $65,000. The fleet, they have an older forklift that is reaching its end of life. And we also are recommending an awning for $20,000. Let me explain the awning. You all know Eddie that works in fleet, our fleet manager. When I first took a tour of the city the day before my final interview here, we went out to fleet, and I remember meeting Eddie for the first time. He was inside the bed of a sanitation truck in the middle of August in the blazing sun, and he was working on something. And I just thought, my God, this is what a tough job that is. But that's back then, we still had some trees. What happened is after Hurricane Milton came, the tree cover that was in that back end where the garage is and where they work on the bigger vehicles outside in the open, we lost a lot of that tree cover. So now that those conditions have gotten even worse. So it's really not the greatest working conditions to have our employees being out there in the blazing sun in a sanitation truck trying to get stuff fixed. So we feel it's important to get an awning to allow them to be at least have some shade cover. And that's $20,000. Next slide takes us to sanitation. We have one request in sanitation for a commercial front loader for $475,000. And I'm happy to say that we are not proposing any rate increase, so a zero rate increase in fiscal year 27 for sanitation. Now, this does mean, as you saw in the backup, that we are not hitting the 25% reserve target, which we didn't hit last year either. And we're comfortable with that because sanitation, unlike water and sewer, sanitation kind of is more nimble, kind of works more like a business than any of our other funds. So we feel like if there's ever any issue that, there'll be a way through add a customer base, new services, or some changing in fees internally here and there that can accommodate that. So we're not that concerned with that for that particular fund. So that's the reason why we're comfortable with a zero rate increase in FY27. And honestly, to be frank with all of us, we were very much aware of the impact from the water rate increase. We're aware of other issues going on in the community too. We know we have a GEO bond. We have a number of different things that will impact our residents. So we wanted to be conscious of that with how we did the budget in fiscal 27. Next slide will take us to the Community Redevelopment Agency, the Tax Increment Fund. So this year, for fiscal 27, we're proposing $908,754 in debt service, $484,528 in the administrative overhead, which we talked about extensively earlier, $3,000 for the audit, and then that leaves a reserve for contingency of $1,189,900. That's our tax increment fund. You go to the next slide. During the council priority setting session, I believe it was the vice mayor that brought up having us explore moving to phase 2 of Riverside Park potentially. How could we fund phase 2? So we looked at that. So to remind the council and the community, we have budgeted, this council has budgeted $3.8 million towards the project for Riverside Park. When the consultants came in earlier this year, the council agreed to do a phase 1. They broke the project into phases, and phase 1 was going to end up being $3.45 million. Phase 1, we anticipate will start construction first quarter of 2027. To do phase 2, based on the last time we looked at the numbers, it was going to be $2.61 million additional cost to do phase 2. Right now, I understand this was brought up in council priority setting, but I don't recommend that we consider using any additional unassigned fund balance, which was the bulk of that $3.8 million. $3 million of it was unassigned fund balance. I think, and also if you might look at Carlos, you might say, Carlos, look, I just saw $1.189 million in reserve for the TIF fund. Can we use some of that? You could use all of this. I mean, it's at your discretion. I think that there's just a lot of factors out there that are still unknowns. First of all, we haven't even started construction. I know there is benefit for mobilization if you made some changes, you if you were going to decide on a second phase while the contractor's still on site, that makes some sense. There's some savings there. But I also am aware that, again, going back to the state constitutional amendment that may be approved, if that is approved, it will impact TIF as well. I mean, the amount of TIF you get will be impacted. And then also how we can maintain some of the infrastructure may be impacted in the future also. So I think there's some unknowns here that I don't feel comfortable enough saying, yes, I recommend, let's go ahead and do it. If you want to, obviously, it's your decision, but I think we may want to wait a year and then take a look at this. And we may even want to, maybe you don't wait a full year. You may, once we start construction, we'll know what happened in the November ballot. We can come back to you, council, and you can look at doing some sort of an amendment at that point to the CRA and the TIF fund budget and looking to do something different if that's your decision at that point. So that takes us to the final slide, which is just questions. And that's it.
Thank you, Mr. B. Council members, questions?
Yes?
Anybody down here to start for a change?
Go ahead.
Okay, Councilmember Fernandez.
Okay, so I want to start with the council chamber upgrades. I don't have any issue with upgrading the items that you suggested, but my question for you is, with as much as people are getting their information online, watching the YouTube channel, et cetera, do we have enough or do we have the ability to make it so that that is a much more robust ability to broadcast, just because that's how more people are getting information today than they have been in the past, and we haven't had, a full comprehensive audio-video system.
If you could help me, just tell me what your vision of that means.
Well, I'm just thinking of making sure that we have the technology available that consistently to broadcast, to video the meetings, to broadcast the meetings, to make sure that we can get them out and on various mediums in a broadcast capacity versus kind of doing the best that we can with what we have.
Very timely observation. Barring whatever happened here today, which we'll have to look at, and if that requires us to make any additional changes, we'll obviously let council know. I think we have been able to improve our broadcasting ability, I think, considerably in the last few years. I mean, if you look at where we were before and where we are today, I think we've done a lot more. Based on the structure that you have in place today. I mean, the way you do the meetings today, we accommodate those. We broadcast all our meetings, typically that in this room, the regular meetings live, obviously. these meetings, the workshops, we typically will record them and then put them on live, usually the same exact day, because it allows the Mr. Hill to edit the meetings so that it flows better for the public. But we can always look at it if there's other improvements that we can do in terms of, the marketing team's great, the marketing communications team, in terms of looking at how can we improve the experience. Now, if we're talking about doing something completely different, whereas, doing some sort of like virtual meeting capacity for regular meetings, that would be a very different scenario, and we'd have to look at that if that's where you want to go.
No, I'm just thinking along the lines of making sure that we have the equipment necessary to keep the broadcast consistent and available for people.
Yep.
So, all right, that's for the fire department. This isn't something that was listed, but it's something I wanted to ask about. And so in the past, there have been questions about the equipment that firefighters wear, that there's PFAS in the equipment, or there's various issues that have been raised. And I wanted to ask, I'm not suggesting this, I just want to ask about it, and that is, if we were buying new equipment, which I know that there's a rolling 5-year timeline of buying new equipment, but would that be considered an ongoing expenditure, or would that be considered a capital expenditure?
Mr. Ingram, you want to take that one?
Yes, we've had these discussions internally. It all depends on the cost. 5,000 is our capital threshold. So if the piece is $5,000 or more, then we capitalize. If it falls under 5,000, we don't. And it also depends on if we order a piece of equipment that it may have several parts to it. When I say equipment, I'm talking about you're talking about the body,
Yes.
armor, whatever they call it. If it's all comes together, we can purchase it all together and it's over 5,000, then we could capitalize it. But a lot of times these are bought in piecemeal, and most of the apparel comes under 5,000, so you'll see it in our operating cost. And we did budget for some this year. But when we can't capitalize it, we do, and we'll pay for it out of the CIT fund since it's capital.
Okay, thank you. For Parks and Recreation, I don't have any issue with the items that you've outlined here as a current year or fiscal 2027 capital budget, but I do want to know, how are we evaluating the trends, the various recreation or exercise trends that maybe come up throughout the time? Racquetball used to be popular, now it's pickleball or whatever, but how are we analyzing those trends to make sure that we're not spending money, investing it in some way, and then the recreation trends have changed and we need to invest in something else? How are we keeping consistent with those trends and making sure that our investment reflects what people are looking for in recreation and exercise?
Sure. So I can address part of that question, and I'll ask the interim director to come up and pick up the second half. So looking at the list of projects today in this particular proposed budget, these are all things in this particular proposed budget that we know are in high demand. Right, so the pools are always in high demand at the facility. The clay tennis courts are very popular, so we've got metrics to show that. The fall zone at the playground gets a lot of usage. The fall zone, again, is more of a safety issue. So in this case, which I know is not directly what you're asking, but I just want to make sure that we know that this request, I think, is clearly measurable and we understand why we need it. Now, as to the measurement of trends, I'm going to ask Interim Director Collins to come up and talk to us about what the department typically does.
Good morning still. As far as trends, we're watching FRPA, the Florida Parks Recreation, and RPA. They're constantly shooting out information. We talk to our members. It's very informal as of right now. But I mean, that's kind of basically where we're at. We look at other parks and recreation agencies, see what's going on there. But that's pretty much it.
Okay, thank you. I just have a couple more. As far as the paving, and this is something that I've asked about, and this might not be something that is going to come through this budget, but with the streets, the sewer piping, the water delivery piping, the stormwater piping, et cetera, is there anything built into any of those budgets to start creating a more manageable system of ongoing maintenance where it's very, I don't want to say very specified. I know that there would be changes. I know that there could be something that happens that takes something out of a schedule, but is there anything that we have planned that we would need capital funds for to create a full system of the timing of when each road would be expected to be repaved, or the stormwater pipes expected to have reached their useful life, or et cetera, just so that we start with a timeline?
Yes, but that goes to what I was talking about a little while ago, which I think is that comprehensive plan about mapping our underground infrastructure and knowing what the vintage is of each particular pipe segment, valves, and things of that nature. And as I noted, that's going to be tough. Again, looking at priorities, we'd love to do it all, but I just don't think we have the financial wherewithal within the rate today, or capacity-wise, bandwidth-wise, with the staff we've got today to do that in the fashion I think that you and I probably are on the same page with in terms of where we think we need to go. So I think what we're going to have to do, and what's been outlined in this budget and in prior budget, bits and pieces, we're going to take elements of this. For example, with our paving program, what I would imagine, what I would expect, is that when we look at these streets, that we're going to look at the underground infrastructure in all of these streets first before we start rolling out the pavers, to make sure, do we need to change, are there some pipes in this area that need to be changed out right now? Because now's the time to do it, right? Get the pipes out if you can before you come through, and particularly if you're going to do full depth reconstruction, there's really no reason not to look at that. If you're just doing a skim and overlay, that's a little different. But that's what I would expect. So every community typically will do that when they do a general paving. But that's, again, still rather piecemeal. It's not what you're describing. I would like to do what you're describing. I just think we just have to get past some of these other bigger capital demands right now on the watering and wastewater side of the house first.
Okay, and then my last question has to do with sanitation. And really the only question I have about it is, in the past, we have seen the tipping fees go up from the county pretty extraordinarily high. And when we have said zero rate increase, which I'm fine with your assessment right now, I just want to ensure that we have considered what the potential increase could be passed along to us, because it's not a charge that Temple Terrace charges, it's simply a pass-through from the county. And, have we considered what they may be increasing, or do we know already what their rate is going to be?
Mr. Ingram, we have that number now, don't we? Or
I know Jason may have more knowledge on this. I know it was plugged into the budget. I do not know off the top of my head what the percentage was.
Mr. Warnfield, do you mind coming up?
And really, it's not so much that I need to know the actual amount, it's more that have we considered that this is part of it?
The assumption is we plugged it into the budget, so we wouldn't present you a zero rate increase unless we could absorb it. Just come up with, we just need the number, whatever the number is. And while he's coming up, we are entering the last year of the contract with the county. Am I correct, Mr. Warfield?
Expires in 2027, I believe. That
Yeah,
is.
so we're gonna have to negotiate a new contract. Whether we do it with the county or we do it with the city of Tampa or some other iteration, that's something that staff's looking at right now. One of the things that I would like to ask for, whether these things are gonna be negotiated, would be caps, some sort of caps on these increases, because what we discovered with the county is that there was no cap. It's whatever they felt like they could charge. Now, I'm not saying they will agree to that, but I think we have to start off on the premise that we need some cost containment on our side, even if it's some sort of like a bandwidth of, flexibility in that pricing. Otherwise, we're just budgeting in the dark.
Yeah.
If we don't have it, if you don't have it, we'll come back to the council. I'd
No,
rather just give them the
so-
right information.
They sent it to us, so I have to do the math. They sent it to us in the dollar amount. So let me get you the.
We'll get that
Let me get you the
information.
rate.
And again, my only concern was that in years past, sometimes the increases came more than one time a year, and it was a surprise to us. And I just want to make sure that we've considered that as part of our budgeting process.
That's a good observation. I can tell you that we've had some discussion about not basically proposing a zero rate increase, because even if you looked at the pro formas for the sanitation fund, I don't believe there was a year where it was a zero rate increase. I think there was always basically a projected increase of some sort. I think that the feeling was we felt we could absorb it this year, but if we go back and we run the math again, if we find differently, we'll obviously make an adjustment and bring that to your attention.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to add to that. We're only buying one truck this year. That's helping it. We have been upgrading for the last several years the sanitation trucks because they've been aging, they break down, we have to pay rental. So we're progressively getting better with that and not having to spend as much on the maintenance side, having updated those trucks. The other thing is the revenue has done well with the Amazon program, our ability to resell some of the scrap materials from Amazon. Those factors have all contributed in recovering what 5 years ago was a fund that we were struggling to keep in the black.
That's it.
Vice Mayor? Councilmember Schisler?
Yes, just a couple of quick observations. Capital overall looks great. Not a problem, and the utility funds as well. I did have a concern or a question regarding the 130 Street Fund. I didn't see anything for striping. I looked in the detail, and are we doing anything with that?
Jason could address this too, but the striping, you're not talking about repaving, just striping?
Striping.
We determined that's actually cost under $5,000 for most of the striping projects we do. So those are now not in capital, but in maintenance costs.
Are they included in the current budget? Is there anything included?
27 budget.
I'll have to
Yes.
double check. I believe it is.
Yes, there's striping included in.
Okay, that's good. The other comment, concern I had regarding the sanitation fund, I'm not asking for increase in rates. No, trust me, I'm not. But 17.9%, if we have to do any kind of bond issue, I don't think they're gonna allow us to aggregate our reserves in order to come up with something that is acceptable for a bonding issue. So we might there's just this caveat, be careful, particularly if we have to go with something specific. That's
Yep,
all.
right, no, well, we agree, yeah, we couldn't aggregate, if you're talking about aggregating sanitation and the water
Yeah,
reserves.
exactly,
No,
yeah.
no, we're not, we know that.
Yeah.
We were looking at it from the perspective, like we always do, I mean, this is not a change. Every year we go through and look from the perspective of our residents in our community or our taxpayers as to, how can we make sure that the impact from what we do here in our budgeting is the least impactful on them? And we were in a position with sanitation that we felt we could do it with a zero rate increase. We know it's not directly related in terms of the bond, but we felt that it's a bill. Your utility bill includes your garbage and includes your water and rate. So that's what we were looking at. Like I said, if we go back now and we look at everything, and if we get any new information, we have to come back and say, no, that we have to be based on like what the pro forma predicted we were going to do with some sort of a limited rate increase. We'll bring that to your attention. But right now, we're in a spot we feel we might be able to pull it off at zero.
The other side of my concern is that part of our annual audit is the analysis of our reserves and the economic outlook and everything. And it took us a long time to get out of trouble with that. I don't want us to start getting dinged in the next couple of years and it become an audit finding. It took us a long time to get rid of that moniker. So that's more of a caveat for the future than now. I agree. Don't make it any worse than it has to be. But we got to be careful going forward. That's all.
Absolutely.
Councilmember Kravitz.
With respect to the 8.7 million investment in the water treatment plant for 2027, does that include the temporary treatment solution that we're pursuing?
I don't believe it. Did it include temporary treatment? I don't believe it did. No, it did not. That number did not include that because that was an add-on that came up during the town hall. These are the things we're going to flesh out right now. We're going to bring to your attention on August 11th.
So that's going to find its way in?
Potentially be presented to you, and then whether the council, you're going to have to tell us what you want to do at that point based on information we'll have at hand.
And the 10% rate increase, we're going to address that on August 11th as well. Is that the plan?
So at the workshop on the 11th, at least my vision of it would be that we'll have some of the outstanding questions answered by then to be able to present that information to you. You asked about temporary solutions, for example. The county, we already know the answer in the city of Tampa. If we have an answer from the county, what that would cost if they said yes and what we could do. So we'll have those costs broken down to you. Any other lingering answers to questions that we'll have that. And then that evening, that day, we'll be able to present to you, here's the answers, here's what we think you may want to consider potentially, and then what the rate implication might be from that. And then ultimately, it's the council's decision as to what you want to do, and you give us some direction, and we'll prepare something to come back to the council for actual hearing in September.
Good, okay. And when it comes to the park, I wanted to ask about the 3.45 having been committed. Have we received bids yet from anyone?
No, because we're still in the permitting phase right now, so they're engaging back and forth with the different regulatory agencies. I anticipate we'll be at a bid letting sometime in the fall, most likely, and then hopefully construction in the beginning of 27.
If there are bids received that end up higher than anticipated, do you have already a contingency of amenities that will be scaled back, or what's the plan to deal with that?
Right now, we are going to bid the project the way the council directed us to in terms of what you wanted to see in that phase. There was if I recall, there was a fair amount of contingency already built in to that budget. So I think it's a little premature right now for us to kind of speculate on that. I think once we get those bids in, we'll be able to, if we find that all of them are far higher, then we'll have to have a conversation back with the city council as to what you would like us to do at that point. Now, if something is within the contingency window, that's something we can handle administratively, that would be simpler, but your scenario, I think, contemplates of some bigger abnormality there, then that would be something we'd bring back to you.
Never happens, but you never know.
Mm-hmm.
My final question is also about the park. This is just on my memory, so I don't know if this is completely accurate, but my recollection was that the parking was one of the absolute largest items, over $1 million at Riverside Park. So please do correct me if I'm wrong about that. And since we are now selling the south parcel adjacent to Enigma Plaza to the same developer, and he is to some extent consolidating parking and also building a walkway that connects to the park, I wanted to ask whether there is a possibility of exploring reducing the scope of the parking at Riverside Park somewhat, perhaps to save $500,000 or whatever it may be, if we could then piggyback off of the parking in that other development, because there is a lot of parking now going to go into that section of downtown, and we might be able to benefit from that.
So, Councilmember, on that one, the direction we have from City Council is to build a project based upon what Council decided back, whatever, February, I think it was. That's the direction we've given our consultants. That's the direction they're operating under. If the council now as a whole wants us to go in a different direction, I think you're going to be careful too, just thinking about this, because we haven't gotten indications from the property owner that he is wanting to use, we got some indication he may want to use some of the city parking actually for his facility for some of the larger things that he wants to do. So I don't know if he's necessarily aligned with having us use his property on a more permanent basis. But again, the direction is, we've got the parking the way it is. If you want us to do something differently, somebody needs us, talking about motions, that would be something we'd probably want to have in a motion, that, because it's a pretty substantive change.
All right, well, let's wait and see how phase one goes, and then we can have a look at that. All right, thank you. That's all I got.
I just have one question, and I have a comment when we're exhausted questions, but this may be for the police chief, but the expansion of the drones. Chief, I know, and I don't want to go into a great deal of detail about this on public record, but I know that there's some limitations to the drones that we have, the technology that's used. Are we purchasing, does the new drone expand that capability, solve that limitation?
The drones we've purchased for the last few years do solve that problem.
Okay. All right. So I just wanted to make sure we weren't buying yesterday's stuff. Okay. All right. That's good. Any other questions? I've got a comment if we're exhausted to questions. And so this budget obviously takes effect October the 1st. The election is in November, right? The beginning of November. The ballot question concerning property taxes during the election is a game changer. I mean, that's a huge reset for not just for us, but for all 411 cities and all 67 counties. And this is a real game changer, not just a little adjustment. Some of these capital things we need to do regardless of what happens with the election. I mean, we need to buy the truck, we need a garbage truck, we need to keep the replacement scheduled, some of these things, but others of the capital program that we've discussed here, at least in my mind, and that's why I'm bringing it up here for everybody to talk about, some of them we would need to really look at and reconsider. I mean, some of this stuff, we may not, we're buying equipment to enable activities that, truthfully, we might not even be able to do that activity anymore if the property tax referendum passes. My question or for discussion is, I mean, we're only talking about, if the measure fails, we don't need to do anything because we've got a budget and we need to just move forward with the budget. But if the initiative passes in November, I think we need to regroup here in a meeting to go through and say, okay, I mean, it's going to take us a long time to figure out all the extent of what we're going to have to pull back on. But some of this, particularly as it pertains to the capital, the general revenues kind of is what it is, but the capital, some of this is discretionary. Even the park. I mean, I know it's funded, but we need to really do we really want to build a park 60 days after our property tax? I mean, I don't know. We need to have a talk about that. Do we want to hire a new GIS specialist, in October, only to be doing layoffs potentially in a year? So, anyhow, the reason I bring this up is I think if this passes, and first of all, I don't think we ought to go out on October 1st and try to get a purchase going on all of this. Some of this I think we need to wait until see what the outcome of the election is. And second of all, I think sometime after, if this passes, we need to start getting together and saying, okay, what moving forward do we need to not do that we had planned to do? So I don't know what the plan is or what the desire is for that, but, and we're facing 25% reduction in our general fund. You don't do some of this same stuff, if it passes.
Well, my 2 cents is, one, yes, some of it maybe we decide is not going to be possible based on future, but some of it, like, at least what I see listed for the rec center, for sure, even though it could be
Yeah.
potentially that we can't, that's not going to be one of the services that the city provides the same funding for, but that stuff to me seems like it's a need for right now. So I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to most of what is listed here, especially in the enterprise funds, because those are going to be paid for by totally different fees, like the fees to provide those services and then the gas taxes and things. But I would think that we will need to regroup probably about the entire funding of the general fund, if, depending on the outcome of that vote. So, and we are allowed to amend the budget at any time during the year. So I would agree that we would need to revisit pretty much our entire financial future, depending on what the outcome of that vote.
Yeah.
Yes, Vice Mayor.
Some more comments on that, and I'll just do Parks and Rec. You know, some things, unless we, and I say we, Councilmember Schistler and myself won't be part of this conversation. But the next council, unless you decide to close the pools, those two pools need to have the Marsite redone regardless, unless we just close them and fill them in, because the health department controls some of that, so you can't keep putting off the Marsite. We tried that years ago, and it almost failed miserably. So things like that, and the surface of the playground and some of that stuff and other items, a lot of our capital's in CIT, which doesn't. So I agree with you, Mayor. I think we need to talk about it. But I don't know if, you know, when is the election, November, December 1, or whatever we get back together. I don't know if it should be that soon. I also expect if it passes, there'll be some legal challenges and stuff to drag it on a little bit. So, but anyway, but I agree, we need to look at everything.
Okay. Anything else with capital? Questions, comments? Okay, so what do we want to do here? We have two more funds, enterprise and special revenue. Now, we were scheduled to go in the morning, break, and then come back in the afternoon.
Actually, this presentation encompassed everything. So you get enterprise, special revenue, capital, everything's,
Oh,
that's it.
Yeah.
You're
we
done.
don't have a decision point. We're done.
You can make a decision point, I guess, if you want. What I would ask is if you are comfortable with the preliminary budget has been presented, if you want to make a motion saying we're comfortable with it, we can move forward. If you were strongly opposed to something, we would need to know that pretty quick. Obviously, we've got some outstanding issues, a couple bits and pieces here that we'll bring back to your attention. But that's up to you.
Was this how was this noticed? This is a budget work session.
Oh, that's right, it's a workshop, so yeah, we're not voting. We're not voting. So as long as you, our impression is that you seem relatively okay what was presented, for the most part, barring the questions that we've made note of, so that we'll operate under that premise and get answers to anything that's outstanding.
Councilmember Kravitz?
My one major concern is that the temporary filtering and softening solution isn't in there. So that would be, if we're proceeding with that,
Yep.
I think it doesn't have to be included per se, but it could be included perhaps as a contingency.
Yep, understood. And again, just as a reminder, the water piece is still the one that's least fleshed out, because we're going to address that in August.
Councilmember Schistler?
I think we should continue to move forward, take into consideration the aforementioned items that you still need to come back with for the August meeting.
I am very comfortable with what I've heard, so.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much.
Very good. Any other issues concerning the budget that anybody wants to discuss before we adjourn?
School's out.
Finance, everybody's good? Everything's good, legal, we're good? Okay, we'll stand adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
I'll make a